The Quest of St. Nicholas, Chapter 3. Nicholas trudged through the knee-deep snow, cold and weary to the bone. He had been walking for days, and the blizzard had not relented. He knew not where. He only knew to go north. His heart kept telling him to go that direction. As he returned to prayer again and again, he heard the beckoning voice. "Go north," it said. And so he went, venturing into where he knew some great forces of darkness were gathering. He knew not what or how. He also knew that somehow he would find Basilios there. He did not know how, but he just knew that somehow this call in his heart, this call to face the darkness, this call that had been tugging on his heart for years. He tripped over a stump buried in the snow, and he stumbled, falling to his knees. Icy cold snow shocking his face as he then fell forward, face first into the snow. He groaned. In his weariness, he barely knew if he could get up again. He began to think maybe this was where he would die. It seemed a strange thought to him. Not that he hadn't prepared his heart for death, but that he would feel such an urgent beckoning to go north, only to die alone in the cold wilderness. But even if he did so, he knew he had to be faithful to this call, even if he died in the attempt. He struggled to his knees and let out an exasperated prayer. "O Theotokos, Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me, for I do not know if I can carry on any more. As a servant to your Son, I have striven to live faithfully, but my strength leaves me unless you give me aid. For never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protections, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided." An icy gust cut through his cloak again, and he shivered. He leaned on his staff, slowly got back to his feet, picked up his sack again, and began his slow trudge. He looked, hoping he might find shelter somewhere. At that moment the clouds parted in the sky, revealing the full moon shining down upon him. It seemed like a glimmer of hope in this icy darkness, comforting him and encouraging a bit of strength in him. Not much, but enough to take the next few steps. He couldn't see very far, and he thought of those words from Holy Writ, "Thy word is a light unto my path." He walked further on. As he walked, he began to hear a strange sound. Is that music? Something like the tinkling of bells, and he could have sworn he heard distant laughter. Not a sinister, malicious laugh, but playful, like the laughter of children. Yet he knew he was miles away from any village. There couldn't be any children here. But the faint sound persisted. Just as he tried to sharpen his ears to listen to it, the sound would keep escaping, as if it kept slipping through the grasp of his hearing. He noticed that the moonlight seemed to grow steadily. In fact, it seemed to begin to swirl, as if some of its beams had solidified into a silvery mist in the bushes and trees just beyond him. But no, it couldn't be. It was just his eyes playing tricks on him in the darkness, wasn't it? Just like the sound that seemed to escape his ears, this silvery mist seemed to escape his vision. Sometimes he caught it in the corners of his eyes, but he turned and see nothing. Strange. And while this eerie experience seems like something that should cause fear, like you hear in stories of ghosts and ghouls and goblins, Nicholas felt a strange comfort, as if he were being pulled into a silvery and musical embrace. "What is going on?" he thought. The music and the silvery lights grew stronger. There was no doubt about it now. There was music and voices. Voices that shifted between singing and laughter. Yet the laughter didn't seem like a disruption in the song, but rather part of the music. "Hello?" he called out into the darkness. "Is someone there?" No answer. But then he heard a rustling in the trees nearby, and he moved that direction, calling out again, still strangely unafraid. And as the music grew stronger, so did the light, until he broke through a brush of trees into a small clearing, and there, what a sight did he behold! For gathered together around a small fire were 7 children, but decked out in the strangest clothing and weapons, like little warriors. And these little warriors sat laughing and singing around the fire. But while they seemed to be part of the music seemed to come from somewhere else, all around them, as if they were a part of it, joining in the song, but that they themselves were not the sole source of the song. And as soon as they noticed him, these warrior children turned and stood. But then Nicholas realized they were not children, but rather just small people with peculiar pointed ears. Yet they were like children in the sense that they were no taller, and had a hint of innocent mischief and delightful wonder in their eyes, and even had a youthful appearance about them. Yet despite their size and youthful appearance, they also seemed to have an aged wisdom about them, as if they were far older and far wiser than they appeared. They looked strong and sturdy, as if they had much experience with long journeys and with battle. Nicholas noticed their clothes, too, were certainly not ordinary children's clothes, but like that of little warriors. Silvery tunics, trousers and hooded cloaks, leather vests lined with a silvery floral pattern, and armored bracers. They all wore pointed stocking caps, the point hanging down their backs. These caps, too, were made of the same silvery material as their tunics and trousers. He noticed 3 of these warriors were little women, their tunics lengthened to be short skirts over their trousers. When they stood and turned to look at him, their eyes were not at all startled. In fact, they seemed as if they'd been expecting him. They smiled. "Ah, he's arrived!" one of the little men shouted gleefully. They stood up and gathered around Nicholas. The one who had spoken had an impressive-looking sword strapped to his back. He was flanked by 2 more of the little men, each leaning on walking sticks. One of these 2 wore spectacles, an odd look on one who looked decked out for hard travel and battle. And behind these 3 stood the 4th little man, who stood a head taller than the others and had a large battle hammer strapped to his belt. On the other side of the fire stood 3 warrior maidens. One had a large round shield strapped to her back, and the other a quiver of silver and gold feathered arrows, and a large bow in her hand. The 3rd little woman, with the same warrior cloak and tunics as the others, did not appear to bear any weapon. And it was she who stepped forward and spoke next. "Welcome, Nicholas. We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" Nicholas asked, thoroughly confused. "How can you have been expecting me? I do not even know how I ended up here. I'm not entirely sure where I am, nor where I am going, and I didn't think anyone had been looking for me. And who are you? How do you know me?" "Oh, Nicholas," she said with a delighted musical laugh that almost seemed to echo with the tinkling of bells. "Always passionate to drive forward to answers. Your zeal in seeking truth will serve you well on your quest. We know all about your quest to the north, to face the gathering darkness, and we have been sent to aid you." "Sent? To aid me? By whom? And how do you know about my quest?" She laughed again, and another one of her musical laughs. "All will be revealed and answered in good time. We are servants of the Moon Maiden, who's watching over your quest. And that is enough of an answer for now. But come, you are exhausted, starved, and nearly frozen to death. Rest for a time by the fire to warm up and have some food." He was ready to protest her invitation, desiring to know more, but he was, in fact, too exhausted to argue. And he had the overwhelming sense that he could trust these little elves. Two of these little men helped him on a log next to the fire, and Nicholas felt an overwhelming relief at the delightful warmth that seemed to warm the whole clearing, as if he had stepped right inside a cozy house by a warm hearth. And while his head swirled with wonder and with questions, he was content for now to sit and relax by the warm fire, as these elves eagerly waited upon him. A warm, dry blanket was wrapped around his shoulders. A steaming, sweet-smelling brown liquid was ladled into a cup and given to him, and he was delighted by the familiar sweet taste of hot chocolate. Tender memories of his beloved children in Mama Lydia's orphanage flooded his mind. He quietly prayed for them, and knew that somehow his quest was also a quest on their behalf. That his seeking to confront this darkness would help them to confront the darkness in their own lives. Next to the kettle that hung over the fire, from which the hot chocolate had been ladled, a flat metal griddle was set up. One of the male elves, one who bore a staff but was not wearing glasses, tended to an oval-shaped, sweet-smelling pastry. In its middle, the ends of an oval-shaped ring crossed and overlapped on itself. It appeared to have some sort of fruit and cream filling and sugary glaze. After a few moments, the elf who was tending to it cut out a piece and served it up to Nicholas, and then served the rest of the elves, with the help of the female elf who had first spoken to him. He observed that while she seemed insistent on serving the others, they all held a sort of reverential respect for her, as if she were a royal leader of theirs, who freely humbled herself to the role of a serving maid. The sweet and delicious pastry melted in his mouth, and he felt warmed, strengthened, and life spread throughout his body. And his aching muscles that had seemed frozen stiff were now reinvigorated. One of the many swirling questions he had, one came to the surface as this pastry nourished him. "What is this wondrous pastry?" "Kringle," said another of the male elves, the one who wore spectacles. "Kringle?" Nicholas asked. "I've never heard such a word." "Ah, yes. A kringle is a special pastry, one that symbolizes prayer and the incarnate light, whom you serve. It is folded like a knot in the middle, representing hands folded in prayer, a shape that will later become known as pretzel, which means prayer. Eventually, it will be called in another language simply kringle, which means simply ring or circle. But this will be combined with another phrase in another language, Kris Kindle, that is the Christ child, which will be simply simplified to Kris Kringle. And thus the kringle, a symbol of prayer and of the Christ child, he said excitedly, peering over his spectacles. "That's interesting. But who are you, and who is this moon maiden whom you serve?" Nicholas asked, his swirling of questions now tumbling out in response to the elf's strange explanation of the pastry. "Ah, yes, I know you have many questions," said the female elf, who had originally addressed him, and who was apparently their leader. "Many will be answered along the way as you meet the Moon Maiden and as we accompany you on your quest. But let us begin by properly introducing ourselves with our names, as we know yours, but you do not know ours. I am Caritas, but you can simply call me Carrie for short." She then went through and introduced the rest of the elves. Her fellow warrior maidens, with the large round shield strapped to her back, was called Fides, whom they more simply and affectionately called Fiddy. The other, who was strapped with a bow and arrows, was named Spez. She then turned to introduce the male elves. Justicia, commonly just called Justin, was the elf with the large sword, who bore himself as if he had a position of leadership among the elves, but was still deferent to the women elves, and particularly to Carrie, who was the leader of the whole troop. The two with the staffs were Prudencia, the one who wore spectacles and who had explained Kringles, and Temperancia, who had been tending to the Kringle, or as they called them for short, Prudy and Temps. And finally, the large elf. Large, in comparison to the other elves, as he stood a head taller than the rest of his troop, but who still was no taller than a tall child. He was decked out with a large warhammer strapped to his belt and was named Fortitudo, or as they called him, Fort. "But come, Nicholas, now that we've introduced ourselves, and you've had some time to get warmed up and fed, we shall take you to the Moon Maiden." Chapter 4. The Moon Maiden. They packaged up the cooking supplies, put out their fire, and left the unusually warm clearing to venture back out into the cold wintry night. But the blizzard had calmed to a gentle snow, the whipping wind now but a gentle breeze. It no longer seemed to Nicholas a force of nature trying to destroy him, but a beautiful scene now meant to inspire and rejuvenate him. His mind flashed back to a calm, prayerful evening like this, early in his life, when he'd meditated on the wonders of the incarnation of the light, and then unexpectedly received his call to be a bishop of the church. They came to a great hill that rose above the trees, and they made their way up the hill. The sight at the summit of the hill took Nicholas's breath away. The full moon beamed brightly through a part in the clouds, and the snow sparkled brilliantly. The moonlight illuminated a garden in the midst of this wild and wintry wilderness. A hedge of small shrubs encircled the summit, with smooth, spiky green leaves and red berries. But when the circle of this hedge, roses blossomed out of the snow. How could roses be in full bloom in the middle of winter? But it was not this beautiful and wondrous scenery that took Nicholas's breath away. It was the beautiful woman who stood on the hilltop in the center of this hilltop garden. The woman was cloaked with a mantle that sparkled like the stars in the night sky, and light radiated all around her. A crown of 12 stars circled her head, and as he got closer, he realized he could not determine her age. Like the elves, she had a youthfulness about her, and yet her face held a wisdom that made her seem ageless, and perhaps much older than her appearance suggested. She smiled warmly at Nicholas. And while he did not think he knew this woman, there did seem to be something familiar and comforting in her smile. The caring smile of his own mother and grandmother, the smile of dear friends who knew his heart well, and who compassionately cared for him during his most trying times. All of this was bound up in this woman's smile. "Behold the Moon Maiden," said Fiddy. The 7 elves then kneeled in respect, and Nicholas followed suit. And then in a flash he realized he did know who this woman was. "Nicholas, I see my 7 servants have found you. They are to aid you in your quest to battle the gathering darkness. As you now know, I am known by many other names. You perhaps know me as the Theotokos, the chosen mother of the incarnate light. These 7 call me the Moon Maiden, For just as the moon reflects the light of the sun, so I reflect the light of my sun. He is the source of the light you see all around you, and it is he, the king, who sent me with my 7 servants to aid you. Besides these 7 who will accompany you, guide you, care for you, and fight with you, I also give you 4 words. As the story of the king was told in 4 words, that is, 4 gospels, so I give to you 4 words from the Word made flesh to guide and strengthen you for this journey. And each word is connected to the saving sacrifice of the Incarnate One. The 4 words: a circlet, a sign, a spear, and a song. First, a circlet. She then gestured to the shrubbery encircling the garden. Take the branches of this shrub and ring it into a wreath. For this circlet, this wreath of holly, as this plant is called, is a sign of the king's crown. For he was crowned with thorns, and as the pointed leaves represent, and the berries symbolize his precious blood poured out. But the green of this wreath represents the new life wrought by his saving sacrifice. Nicholas then did as the woman commanded, picking some of the holly branches and bending them into a ring, a wreath. Once he completed this, he reverently handed it to the Moon Maiden. She held it in her hands, then bowed her head and closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. Then she approached Nicholas, who had again knelt with the 7 elves. She took his left hand and slid the wreath around his left forearm, as it settled around his large red sleeve. She then spoke. May this wreath encircle you with his protection, and remind you of new life in the midst of the cold and darkness of your trials. The second word, a sign. When you have lost your way and know not where to go, follow the shining sign of his sacrifice. When at a crossroads, follow the cross. The third word, a spear. To battle the darkness, you must obtain the holy spear of Saint Longinus, the very spear that pierced the side of the king at his sacrifice. Seek the Fisher King at his castle Corbenic, a mystical mansion, for he is the keeper of this and other holy relics. And finally, the fourth word, a song. When the voices of darkness threaten to overwhelm you, listen for the song. These are the 4 words that I give you from the king: a circlet, a sign, a spear, and a song. If you follow these 4 things of the king's sacrifice, then by the king you will then conquer, and by his blood you shall win the battle to defeat the darkness. Some of these words or signs you may not understand now, but they will become clear as you go forth. She then prayed a prayer of blessing over them, and one by one laid her hands on each of their heads, and smiling kissed their heads, finally ending with Nicholas. Her smile radiated such light and goodness that Nicholas had to look down, overwhelmed with tears of love filling his eyes. After he felt the warm kiss on his forehead, he then looked up and was shocked to see that the Moon Maiden was gone. They knelt on a plain, snowy hilltop. No flowers, no garden. Had it not been for the wreath of holly around his arm and the elves still kneeling with him, he would have thought this whole thing had been but a dream. Then, silently, Nicholas and the 7 elves rose to their feet, and Nicholas thought he could hear faint music still with a tinkling of bells. They then descended the hill and ventured forth on the quest to face whatever lay ahead.